Let's talk about evil. So I'm going to move on into a different period of history. Well, it's another broad scope of history. Let's look at it that way. But we'll start with Epicurus. So given this famous line, is God willing to stop evil but unable? Then he is not powerful. Is he able but unwilling? Then he is not good. Is he both able and willing? Then how can there be evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? That was Epicurus, and as this meme says, atheists winning the argument since 300 BC. There's never really been a good answer to this. But we'll give one example, slavery. This photograph, I don't know if you've seen this before, it's quite famous. This was taken after the Civil War when slaves were freed in America, and this fellow wanted his wounds to be photographed and preserved for memory and disseminated so that people would see the incredible cruelty that American slavery involved. And these are Bible-thumping people, right? These are people who think the Bible is the shit. They did this to him. And this is appalling. How could any God stand by and watch this happening, much less watch it happening being done in his name with people citing his book, worshiping him, his actual worshipers, his actual followers, without saying a word? It's unbelievable. So what is the probability that a benevolent God would have a valid excuse not to say one heavenly word to his devoted believers about this ever in the whole of history, even worse in the time of American slavery? And what evidence do you have supporting that probability? If you're going to make up some excuse, how likely is it, and what are you estimating? What are you basing that estimate on? Those are the questions you would ask. But in reality, from our background knowledge of benevolent beings, because we know lots of benevolent beings, they're called humans. These humans who happen to be nice people, they're among the nice humans anyway, nice humans with the power to speak unharmed, who don't have to fear anything. I mean, if you're God, you're like Superman, you're invincible. You can't have your head cut off, you can't be shot, can't be burned. There isn't anything they can do to punish you. You can't have your job taken away, whatever it is. If you have no limitations on you that will prevent you from speaking, and you're a nice person, you have no valid excuse not to say anything. In fact, when we look at people, all the examples of other benevolent beings who are in the position of having the power to speak unharmed, a valid excuse not to speak is so rare, we never see one instance of it. And the word rare, by the way, means very infrequent, which happens to mean very improbable. And in fact, it's got to be at least millions to one against, because we know millions of benevolent people who are in this position who are vocally saying, condemning this kind of thing. If God is not doing it, then whatever excuse he has to be rarer than millions to one against. So that's one way to look at it. And of course, you know many other ways to design that argument in terms of pointing out that the excuses just don't hold up. All they do is make their theory more improbable rather than saving it. But I'm going to turn something around altogether. You've probably heard the philosophical moral argument, right? The morals only come from God. People believe there are morals, therefore God must exist, because where else would morals come from? Well, let's look at history. History actually refutes this. Let's treat atheism and theism as two different theories here. Atheism, as a theory, predicts that moral rules will only come from human beings, they will begin deeply flawed, and will be improved by experiment over thousands of years. Note, that is exactly what we observe. Slavery is just one example of many things where the moral rules were created by humans, they were deeply flawed, completely fucked up, one would say, and were improved gradually, very painfully, slowly by experiment over thousands of years. Therefore, atheism is vindicated by the historical record. Theism, as a theory, however, predicts a universe directly governed morally right from the start. In other words, the correct moral laws are disseminated immediately from the beginning. It would have been 40,000 BC, not 800 BC. But we would also possibly see the universe actually designed to be moral. We would have justice laws, stewardship of the world, enacting justice and mercy on God through God. We see none of these things. All of the things you would expect from a moral engineer are not there. But we observe no such laws built into the universe, no stewards or law enforcers but us, ever. So the theistic theory is completely refuted. Its predictions for history do not come true. It's falsified by history itself. Whereas the predictions of atheism are completely verified.
So having noticed this confrontation between religion and science, and faith and reason generally, many of us have become what is now called religious moderates. The religious moderation really is the flavor of religion that is acceptable to so many people who are otherwise rigorously honest in intellectual terms. And in my book, I criticize religious moderation rather harshly, and this has actually been some of the most controversial material in my book. So I just want to run through my argument briefly about this, because it has raised some hackles. The first thing to say up front is just that religious moderation is better than fundamentalism. There's no doubt about that. Religious moderates don't fly planes into buildings. Religious moderates don't organize their lives around apocalyptic prophecy, and that's a very good thing. But religious moderation has some real problems. The first is that it gives cover to fundamentalism. Because religious moderates have made it taboo to criticize faith. They want faith respected. They want the whole project of being religious, being identified as a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, to be respected. That it is impossible to call into question this basic project, the ethical tenability of raising a child to believe he's a Christian as opposed to anything else. And under the cover of this respect, we are now powerless to say the very harsh and necessary things about religious extremism that we need to say, because it is taboo. You have to respect faith. Religious moderation prevents us from even noticing the differences among our religions. It is taboo to notice that all our religions are not teaching the same thing. They're not all equally wise, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. I mean, where are the Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers? If you think for a moment that the kind of violence we see in the Muslim world is born of the Israeli occupation and our misadventures in Iraq, we should see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. The Tibetans have suffered an occupation every bit as brutal and far more cynical than any that we or the British or the Israelis have imposed upon the Muslim world. Something like 1 million, 1.2 million Tibetans have died since the Chinese occupation. Where are the throngs of Tibetans in the streets calling for the deaths of Chinese non-combatants? Where are the Tibetans blowing themselves up on Chinese buses, at weddings, in crowds of children, in front of the offices of the Red Cross and the UN? It's not happening. It's not likely to happen. It's not that you could not possibly form a death cult out of the principles of Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, to some degree, Zen Buddhism informed the worldview of the kamikaze pilots during World War II. But you would have to work very hard to bend the core principles of Buddhism into this kind of orgy of violence. You don't have to work so hard as a Muslim. And it would be impossible as a Jain. I mean, the Jains, this religion of India that has some 10 million subscribers, I think, the core of their religion is nonviolence. No matter how deranged you get by your doctrine as a Jain, you will get less and less violent. I mean, the really religious Jains cover their mouths with cheesecloths so they don't inhale a bug. By no stretch of the imagination can you argue that the core principle of Islam is nonviolence. It is taboo to notice this, and it is especially taboo among religious moderates. Our own religious demagogues will notice this. We can have, Franklin Graham will stand up and say, Islam is an evil religion. They'll notice the differences between religions. Everyone else has the wrong religion. But religious moderates have rendered this taboo. I want to point out that I'm not talking about a race or ethnicity. I'm talking about the consequences of ideas. When I talk about Islam, I'm talking about John Walker Lynn, the white guy from Marin County who went off to fight with the Taliban. We are at war, to digress briefly into our current situation, we are at war with Islamic fundamentalism. Not merely Al-Qaeda, not extremist Islam. The mainstream doctrine of Islam contains this notion of martyrdom and jihad. It contains this imperative to convert, subjugate, or kill infidels. Anyone who says it doesn't has not read the Quran, has not read the Hadith, or is lying about them. It is taboo to notice this.
So do you believe, and I have a reason for asking this, I promise, do you believe that Lucifer was once an angel, and then was removed from heaven and became the ruler of the underworld?
Not the ruler of the underworld. That's a miss. But if was he originally an angel that was created by God,
Okay.
presumably good, who then became the bad guy
And turned against God.
As best as I understand the scriptures, yes. Doesn't tell
Okay.
us everything behind the scenes, but that seems to be clear.
Well, okay, then in your belief, Lucifer, Satan, as we know, as we have been told to believe, knows for a fact that the God you believe in exists, yet he still turned against him. Okay, then that's proof right there that we have to agree that God revealing himself to every single human being on the planet does not make us robots. We could still have free will and choose to turn against him. And I've got to tell you, personally, many of you may disagree with me in this crowd, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, if he revealed himself to me, I wouldn't fall to my knees and worship. I would say, I realize I'm the creature, you're the creator, but I have questions. You have accountability. What you've done is disgusting. Why this? Why that? I have questions. So I would not, at the sight of God, fall to my knees and worship. I
We
wouldn't.
don't know that.
I wouldn't.
What if you encountered
pretty
the
sure.
most extraordinary, beautiful love and light you had ever known? What if you encountered a being beyond your wildest dreams? What if you suddenly realized that a whole lot of things you were blaming him for were the product of the human race? What if you suddenly saw that there was a beauty coming out of the pain and the suffering? What, to make that statement is a very small-minded thing. I don't mean you're not intelligent, but to say, if this God, now you just created him in your own image, or you said, well, based on reading these texts, well, those same texts tell us about his extraordinary compassion. As the Father has mercy on his children, so he has mercy on those who fear him. When you realize how much Israel sinned and how much ugliness happened before God brought judgment, what we learn is extraordinary long-suffering. Well, why doesn't he just wipe out the whole human race already with all the atrocities we've committed against each other right this very moment?
Well, here's
Because
the problem.
He's merciful and long-suffering.
Here's the problem. We have parenting courses. We have counseling. We have talented psychologists and cognitive behavioral therapists. We understand childlike behavior. We understand adult-like behavior. We understand productivity and love and friendships and relationship building. And then we understand hatred. And the God of the Old Testament, a lot of times, acts like a child throwing a fit. He is jealous. He is angry. He will smite you. He will get involved and tell Saul, go wipe out the Amalekites. He makes himself commanders of armies and tells them, go kill those infants, those nursing children. Go murder them. Go kill them. He is not what we would look up to as a respectful leader. He is not what we would say, wow, I can learn a lot from this guy. Look how he brought these nations together. Look how he talked to people and worked out problems. If we had a president doing what God is attributed to doing in the Old Testament, we would turn on him in a heartbeat. He'd be tried for war crimes. But because he's invisible, we fall at our feet. We say, I must not be smart enough to understand. He is still to be held accountable for his actions. And I say to you, and I hate anytime we're in a debate and someone brings up Hitler, you go, oh God, just shut up. And you roll your eyes in the back of your head. But think about this for just a moment. If Hitler were to resurrect right now and prove to every one of us all along, he has been the creator of the universe. Let me show you something. I have come back to life. I am the God. I am the God you've rejected. And here's the thing. I can make light. I can make sun. I can arrange the stars to be in your name. I can show you all kinds of things. Would you fall at your feet and worship Hitler? I wouldn't, because I know what kind of monster he was. And I would not fall at his feet. So he would have some explaining to do. That's my point.
Compassion and mercy and kindness of God that doesn't smite people down when they compare him ridiculously to Adolf Hitler. It's the mercy and compassion of God that gives us breath and life every day. And you as an atheist have to deny the most fundamental moral characteristics of judgment and right and wrong that come from the God in whose image you're created. And now you want to turn around and hold him accountable and use that as a basis to deny his existence. It's completely self-contradictory.
Absolutely
Even
not.
to speak about absolute rights and wrongs and absolute morals, Hitler believed what he was doing is right. That was for the best interest of the human race. Thomas Malthus, with his theories about the best thing to do is, wipe out the poor because otherwise the whole human race is going to starve to death. The very fact that you're going to say that there's right, that there's wrong, that's because of the image of God. Otherwise, there's no talk even about absolute morality.
No. I didn't say there was absolute morality. I'm talking about.
But how can you call for account?
I can't.
You talk about a credit score.
You ready for this?
I'm
going to tell you. Consequential ethics. Ethics, behavior have consequences. Harm is a real thing whether a God exists or not. And I know that harm is bad for people.
There are doctors harming people right now in these hospitals. They're cutting them and hurting them. But that's different because that's actually bringing life. When a judge doesn't bring judgment, when somebody rapes a little girl and kills the parents and the judge said, hey, you had a bad day, we'll just let you off, that's not being good. There is harm. That person is now being put in jail or maybe even the death penalty. God is a righteous judge. What we want to do is live however we want without consequence and never having to answer to a God. Our God is so amazing that rather than destroy us all, his son comes into the world to die for us and take the penalty for what we did. That's outrageous love.
We'll get to that. We'll get to the resurrection of Jesus in just a second. My issue, I understand what you're saying. I understand that to you it's absurd for me to take the morality that you say comes from God, deny the God, and then hold him accountable for that same morality. I understand. In that mindset, I see how I'm completely ridiculous to you. I do.
No. To me, you're just acting as a human being created in God's image.
But for me, I'm not holding God accountable to a morality he created. I'm holding him to a humanistic understanding of reducing harm to human beings and saying that it's ridiculous to me that you can look at the God of the Old Testament and the atrocious behavior of him killing and smiting more than 2 million people in the Old Testament.
Who are the 2 million?
You want names?
No.
I'm
just curious.
You want a list?
I'm just
listen.
My
point is, we'll get to that. My point is, tons and tons of people are killed. You go back to Exodus 11, Exodus 12, the Passover. How many firstborn were just wiped out right there in that village? Thousands and thousands of people. The Amalekites wiped out. The flood, innocent animals, innocent people, just wiped out, drowned, killed. It's atrocious behavior. How can you take that God who has done these disgusting things and say that he is the source of morality? That to me is even more absurd than me holding him accountable.
Okay, right now, would you say that if there were ISIS killers that were about to execute a bunch of Yazidi girls that they had captured, all right? They're about to execute them, and some soldiers could take them out right now. Would that be evil if they could be taken out?
Well, no.
Okay, so what if the people that were judged were evil? You know how long...
No, hold on. Let's make the question fair. Now ask me if those people at ISIS had infants. Would I order to have those infants killed? What if Obama said, go wipe out ISIS and kill their infants, kill their babies, kill the women who are nursing children? Would you still respect Obama? Would you still respect Obama? No, you wouldn't, because that's disgusting.
Right. So here's the thing. Obama's not God. You're not God. That's, once again, from limited information. How long does God wait before he judges the Canaanites? 400 years. 400 years, he said, because the wickedness is not severe enough for the judgment to come. He waits 400 years.
Okay.
But when you read the Old Testament, you're reading thousands of years of history condensed into several hundred pages.
So you don't believe that God...
No, God does not destroy innocent people. What Scripture says is he takes no pleasure even in the death of the wicked, but rather that person would live. So he keeps offering life, offering repentance, offering mercy. We refuse it, judgment comes, and then you call him disgusting. That's disgusting to despise the mercy and long-suffering of God, said with a smile.
I see that. You're so eloquent when you're wrong. You said that God hasn't killed anyone innocent, but when he orders the death of an infant, how can you possibly say that infant is not innocent?
I take that as a weighty question for sure. Of course, I do believe in eternity and children going to be with him, but you don't even know the product of the people that were there, the evil of the people, the kid, how they're being raised, what's in them genetically. You don't even know that.
It's an infant. Why not just say, go kill all the soldiers, bring the women and children here. We will teach them the right way.
That would make sense from my viewpoint. There had to be a reason beyond
But God didn't do that.
Right. That's why he's God and we're not.
So he doesn't have to play by the same rules.
No, he plays by his rules because he's God. And when we follow his rules, we find life. When we despise his rules, we have big trouble.
He can still be immoral.
No, can't be.
Wow.
Of course he can't be immoral.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I can't take credit for this, by the way. I'll read it in a moment, but this is a meme that went around on the internet ages ago. Someone else came up with it. They're pretty brilliant because it's spot on. This is the description of Christianity, dead honest. The belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master so he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. That is literally the Christianity that was being taught in its first, let's say, 1,800 years, almost 2,000 years of Christian history. Totally makes sense, right? Now, a lot of Christians say, well, okay, that sounds a little ridiculous. Okay, so I get you. That's crazy. So we can make this more sensible. And so we came up with a new and improved Christianity where all that Eve stuff, okay, rib woman, stalking snakes, okay, that's all baloney. We'll grant you that. We'll concede you that. But I still have an imaginary friend who magically manipulates the world for me, and he also magically impregnated a woman 2,000 years ago, and she bore him a son who underwent an ancient ritual of blood sacrifice in order to dispel a curse laid upon me, thus ensuring I will be immortal. Footnote, although I've never seen this work for anyone else before. Now, that's completely honest and correct analysis of Christianity, a description of it, and yet it looks absurd when you actually spell it out that way. But what if someone came up to you and said that they have an imaginary friend named Zalmoxis, who they insist is really real, and they'll never die, because this ancient demigod cleansed their soul with blood magic, which grants them the power of living forever in a magical place no one can see. That actually existed. That was the description of the Zalmoxis cult, which is attested in Herodotus, as I mentioned, 500 years before Christianity. So if Zalmoxis cult is ridiculous, Christianity is ridiculous, because it's just the Jewish version of the same religion. But let's go to history more recent. Heaven's Gate cult. The Heaven's Gate cult was in California, and they committed suicide, mass suicide, believing that their souls or the information in their brains would be teleported into a spaceship. They thought they'd get new bodies in this alien spaceship that was flying by the Earth at the time, and yet this whole belief, this idea that when they die that they'll be resurrected in new superior bodies, that's the Christian belief. This is just the scientific version of Christianity. So you have them saying that they'll get new bodies in an alien spaceship flying by, versus what the Christians say is that they'll get new bodies in a magical alternative universe. The weird thing is that the Heaven's Gate cult makes more sense, right? Because in point of fact, they're talking about quantum teleportation and neural engineering, which are actual things that exist. We almost have the technology now. We can see how to build this technology. Within 50 to 100 years, we'll have it. It'll be a simple matter to simply copy a brain and rebuild it in another man-made body. All of that stuff is technology that's within human reach and within human understanding. So their idea actually made sense. There really could have been a flying saucer flying by, and if there was, and those aliens probably could have scanned their brains and reproduced them in new, superior synthetic bodies on the ship. It's entirely possible. But compare this with what the Christians are saying. The Christians are saying not that. They're saying that God needs blood to fix the universe, but only his own had enough magical power to do it, so he gave himself a body and then killed it. Now, when you look at it like this, Christians are talking about voodoo and magic and stuff. They're not talking about anything that even has plausibility. The Heaven's Gate cult is actually more believable than Christianity. So if the Heaven's Gate cult is absurd, Christianity is absurd. So, okay, that all looks bad. But the usual thing is, can't we fix the plot holes with elaborate explanations? And I've misspelled explanations, I see here. Excanations? I was hoping there'd be a joke in there somewhere, but there really isn't. Can't we make excuses? But the thing is, if we have to make excuses, regardless of what they are, and our excuses have no evidence for them, in other words, they don't, because that's why we're making them up, right, on the spot, and those excuses are very improbable, and they typically are, like having an excuse not to mention to your own devoted believers for thousands of years that they shouldn't be keeping slaves. If your excuses are very improbable, then your theory is very improbable. If you have to use an improbable excuse to tack that onto your theory, the improbability of that excuse then attaches to the theory, right? So the theory becomes as improbable as your excuse, or actually more improbable, because if you have multiple excuses, those improbabilities multiply, right? And those of you who know how to do basic probability math, basic multiplying of probabilities, you'll notice that this probability gets smaller, smaller, smaller exponentially. And the fact still is that God has never communicated any essential scientific knowledge, ever. No germ theory of disease is in the Quran, in the Old Testament or the New Testament, for example, nor anything else that's significant like that. God has also never communicated any essential moral knowledge. For example, he completely dropped the ball on slavery. God has never even communicated any consistent religious knowledge of any kind, despite claims going on for 40,000 years, all these different religions, no consistency whatsoever. So these facts remain, no matter what excuses you make for them. And these three facts are exactly what you'd expect if there are no gods, but they're not at all what you expect if there are gods. Okay, so maybe we can grant that. What if God is a total douchebag then, right? Can't there be one of those? And at least then maybe, yeah, he doesn't care about germs or slaves. Maybe, yeah, he's totally pro-slavery. He wants us to die of diseases. He's a total awful asshole. Okay, but he could still exist, right? So you really haven't refuted God yet. So there's really two possible kinds of douchebag gods. The one is natural beings, which are aliens, computers, and things like that. We could be living in the Matrix right now, and the douchebag gods could be our AI agents or whatever. But we're going to rule that out because that requires positing two improbable universes to explain one of them. So that leaves us with the other kind of douchebag god, which is the supernatural being, the being that has irreducibly mental powers, a sort of a brainless, bodiless, ghost mind that can just will things into existence. There are two hypotheses then left. The God hypothesis, which is that the universe was designed, by a ghost even, to produce life. The godless hypothesis, that the universe was not designed to produce life. And the first thing you look at is when you compare these two hypotheses is that we've done this comparison before, again and again and again. The explanation of lightning, the explanation of disease. Jesus thought it was demons. It actually turned out to be germs. And on and on and on. We have constant millions and millions of examples of where supernatural explanations were proffered and they turned out to be false, and natural explanations turned out to be true instead. Now, when you have a horse that wins every single one of a million races, and you have another horse that loses every single one of a million races, and they're about to go head-to-head in another race, which horse do you bet on? It's kind of a no-brainer conclusion, right? So even from the start, before I even continue, I could fold this and walk off stage and I'd be done, right? There's no probable basis for believing in any gods, even douchebag gods. But I'm going to go on because it's funny. Now, unfortunately, my animations aren't working, so I'll talk you through this slide. This is the history of life, right? So we've got 2.4 billion years. Life began, and then there were about 2.4 billion years after that, where life was just sitting around evolving as single-celled life. Now, in actual fact, single-celled life is over 6 times more evolved than plants and animals just by time alone, right? Animals have only been around about 0.6 billion years, in other words, 600 million years, whereas single-celled life has been around 3.7 billion years, so about 6 times more. So single-celled life, bacteria, for example, have been evolving 6 times more longer than we have. So they're actually way more evolved than we are. But in fact, the rate of evolution for single-celled life is actually 500,000 times faster than for multi-celled life like animals, which means that single-celled life is actually many billions of times more evolved than your hand, for example. So single-celled life is badass. Now, that makes a lot of sense in terms of evolutionary theory, but it makes no sense in terms of God. God really likes bacteria. I mean, he spent most of his time working on those suckers, but very little of his time working on us. So what was God doing for the 2.4 billion years fiddling around? And he's got all these single-celled organisms. He doesn't know what to do with them. He can't even figure out that maybe they could work together to do something. And then eventually he comes up with the idea that, you know what, maybe they could congregate together and make more complex entities, like algae. Algae, that's clever. So he creates things like algae where multiple cells can cooperate, but he's still sticking around with those for 1 billion years before he realizes, oh, you know what, maybe I should have these cells differentiate their function so that we can have a more complex animal. Yeah, why didn't I think about that 3.4 billion years ago? Still couldn't figure it out, but eventually did, and he comes up with this differentiation of cells within a multi-celled organism about 0.6 billion years ago. But then it takes him 500 million years to figure out apes, just apes, right? So he's tinkering around with mice and bugs and all kinds of this stuff, but no, it takes him a while to go, apes, oh right, maybe I should do something with those. And then even when he gets to apes, it takes him 4 million years more of tinkering before he figures out how to make people. What was he doing for 4 million years? God, these apes are really stupid. Why can't I fix them? They should be smarter than this. Oh, right, maybe I should do something with the brain. I don't know. When you look at this, you realize that this is exactly what we should expect if life is a natural product of random evolution. It would obviously take billions and billions of years for us to evolve. Obviously, single-celled life would have to evolve vastly longer in order to develop the intercellular machinery and complexity to actually start engaging in cooperation. And obviously, once you have cells engaging in cooperation, it would take a very, very long time for them to evolve the sophisticated machinery that would allow them to start differentiating tissues and therefore creating what we recognize as plants and animals. So this is exactly what we expect if there's no God. It makes no freaking sense if there is a God. Even a douchebag God would be more time efficient than this.
We've got many, many questions on free will. There's an immense amount of interest in a few blog posts I did on free will. Please discuss your views on free will. You've said that it is an illusion, but that choices, intentions, and efforts still matter. But what can words like choice, intention, and effort mean if there's no such thing as free will? Now, there's been so much interest in this, I think I'll probably write a short ebook on it and just pull together my blog posts and go a little deeply into this, because I didn't know this, but this is actually just an issue that really matters to people, apparently, psychologically. Most people, most of the time, feel very clearly that they are the authors of their own actions, that they are the thinkers of their thoughts and the intenders of their intentions. And as a result, from this point of view of being a self that can choose experiences, they think that something very important about their experience would be lost or falsified if, in fact, we determined scientifically or philosophically that there's no such thing as free will. Well, the problem is free will is just a non-starter philosophically and scientifically. Unlike many other illusions, there's no way you can describe the universe so as to make sense of this notion of free will. Now, there are many people who kind of artfully change the subject and try to get a version of free will that still makes some scientific sense. It actually is not what people mean by free will. What people mean is that as their conscious selves, are free to choose their actions. You choose what you want. You choose what you will to do, and this is true in the simplest way with gross motor actions, but it's true in your life course, the kinds of things that interest you, etc. Now, people don't deny that they're influenced by their genes and the environment and the social systems they live in, but they still feel that at every moment there is freedom to choose. Now, what can this mean? From the position of conscious awareness of your inner life, this can't be true, because everything you're consciously aware of in every moment is the result of causes of which you are not aware and over which you exert no conscious control. So, just a simple experiment. You think of someone in your life. Just remember someone you know. Now, the person who comes to mind feels like someone you chose. You just took this person off the shelf of memory, in a sense. But you can't account for why you thought of that person as opposed to somebody else. Okay, let's say you know 100 people in this world. Before I posed the question, you weren't thinking of anybody. I ask you to think of someone you know, and somebody emerges into conscious awareness. We know, as a matter of neurophysiology, that was manufactured by the brain at the end of a series of causes of which you are not conscious, of which you are the mere witness. You are merely receiving that memory of a person. And so it is with every other choice you would make in life. To choose to move your right hand as opposed to your left hand, as long as you want to deliberate about that, you could deliberate for an hour. But the final impulse that's effective, if I go back and forth between my two hands and then finally say, it's going to be my right, I'm in no position to say why it wasn't my left. And we know, and there have been a variety of neurophysiological experiments and now neuroimaging experiments attesting to this, we know that monitoring brain function would have allowed scientists in the lab to predict which hand I was going to move seconds before I'm consciously aware of my motor plan. So this is a problem for this folk psychological notion of free will, this idea that we are the authors in every moment of our inner lives and of what we subsequently do in the world, because we know that we are downstream of causes of which we're not conscious and cannot possibly be conscious. Now, some people want to say, well, okay, so there's this stream of neurophysiological events that are begetting thoughts and intentions and emotions, but we are in a position to change subsequent events. Okay, well, that's actually not true. The we that's in a position to change those subsequent events is simply more events. I mean, there's just one event following another as a matter of neurophysiology. So the idea that I can decide, I can't pick my impulse to move my right hand versus my left hand, but I can decide to stop moving it. That decision to stop is also something that is arising based on prior causes. So however you look at this, you have to admit that the contents of consciousness are born of an unconscious mental life, which is almost certainly at bottom a matter of neurophysiology in our case. Now, there are many subsequent questions that follow on this concern about free will. So if, in fact, we can't choose what we choose, but simply choose, how can choice be important? I mean, well, so then why not just sit back and wait and see what happens? Why choose to do anything? Why get out of bed in the morning? Well, to choose to do nothing is itself a choice. It's actually a very hard thing to do. I mean, you just sit there and wait to see what happens, and you're going to get impatient, you're going to get restless, you're going to want to eat something, you're going to be moved by impulses, which you'll then have to choose to resist in order to sit and just wait and see what happens. So you can't step out of the stream of being lived by your unconscious mental processes, which are showing up as conscious intentions, emotions, moods, desires, etc. The notion that choice is important can be conserved, however, because choice is what, at the level of our conscious life, choice is what precedes some of the biggest changes in our experience. I mean, to choose to marry one person as opposed to another, or to choose to have a child, or to choose to go to college, or to drop out of college. I mean, these are behaviors that are preceded by thoughts and conversations and a lot of effort, mental effort, and weighing of pros and cons. All of this actually does precipitate the next moment of experience and the next and what in fact we choose to do. And yet all of it is being born of processes of which we are not consciously aware. So choice is still just, you have to choose. Like if you want coffee in the morning, you have to choose to make it. You can't just sit and wait for coffee in most cases. So the illusion of free will, or the fact that free will is an illusion, does not undercut all of our mental life that we think is important. It's just, when you pay close attention, you have to admit that you can't account for why in any instant your life has the character it has, and not some other character. And you can't, in those moments where you are making an effort to do something, you can't account for why you're able to make that effort in those moments and not in another moment, and why you're able to make that effort to precisely the degree you can and not more, and why someone else is able to make a greater effort. So this is, and this again does not, another question that comes up in this context is, well then wouldn't it be important to pretend that we have free will? Is there something conserved there that we would lose if we were rigorously honest about how our mental lives are being manufactured? A worry that if we were rigorously honest about free will being an illusion, maybe we would lose something in terms of being motivated to change ourselves, to improve ourselves. We wouldn't value effort in quite the way we need to in order to live the best lives possible. This might be true. It might be that there's a way to talk about effort and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and commitment to a goal, etc., which more or less ignores the unconscious underpinnings of our inner lives and gives people the illusion that they really are the authors, the real authors of their thoughts and actions. That's fine. It's just that is a pedagogical question, a pragmatic question, and in any given instance, it is true that it has an effect to think about yourself in terms of being capable of great effort and being the real author of your actions. So you get up in the morning, and rather than think, well, I just have the genes I have the environment I had the parents I have, I'm a mere recipient of all these causes, I really can't be any different or better than I am, so I'm just going to see what happens. That isn't necessarily the message you need to take from this no free will argument. You can also acknowledge that giving yourself a pep talk or being given a pep talk by others, thinking in terms of effort and striving and bettering yourself, all of that has an effect. Now, it has an effect which, again, is part of this mere stream of neurophysiological influences about which in every instant we are not consciously aware. But it doesn't negate the fact that it does have an effect. And talking in terms of choices and efforts and commitment to goals has a great utility and is not merely illusory. It's, to be given a pep talk that works is to be moved in a way that then has consequences in your life. But again, to pay close attention in any given moment, you are not in a position to know why it works in one moment as opposed to another, or the genetic and environmental influences that explain why you are precisely you as you are in that moment.
Nice talk. Thanks very much. You talk a lot about why we believe. How do we change a deeply held belief? Once you believe something very strongly, how do you discard that belief and move to another one? How do you change someone's brain?
Right. Well, it has to come about by initially changing the like social circle surrounding the person. Like, so in the book I have a chapter about my own belief transition from being an evangelical Christian at Pepperdine University, where I was surrounded by other Christians. And even though I began to read other philosophers and scientists and so on, the doubts are all kept in check by your surrounding social circle. And in that worldview, it's logically consistent. It's internally coherent. It all makes sense. And then when you leave that world, that circle, it all changes. So this is one of the big problems we face. Like, we get I get a lot of letters from people who live like in the Midwest, and they live in a little town, and everybody they know goes to church and they believe in God, and they just discovered that they don't believe. They get this, I found Skeptic magazine at the bookstore. I couldn't believe it. Hey, can you mail it to me in like a brown wrapper so nobody sees it? And I feel sorry for him because, if I say, well, you have to give up all those beliefs and believe the science stuff. If you give somebody a choice between that and giving up their friends, family, social circle, everything, that's a tough choice to make, right? So part of the sell is to say, look, you don't have to give up anything. Just keep whatever you want. Go for the science. And then what'll happen is, slowly but surely, they'll start to drop the superstitions as they see that the way science works, it doesn't allow this, it doesn't allow that. And you have to allow people to do it quietly on their own. It's very rare that anybody just stands up and goes, you know what, I was wrong. That almost never happens. Rarely do politicians ever say, you know what, that whole conservative thing, forget it, I'm switching parties. Right? I mean, who's the last person who did that? Lieberman, I guess, right? I mean, it's so big, it makes headline news. That almost never happens. So you have to sort of make it possible for people to do that without losing anything. And then there's a whole series I recommend, for example, Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. So he has like the 7 most important things you can do to influence somebody's beliefs. Now, it's dealing with like marketing, products, stuff like that. He's a social psychologist who specializes in like marketing and advertising. But really, the experimental psychologists are just way behind all the marketing guys. They already know what these principles are, how to shift people from this to that. So there's some really, really simple tried and true things, of reciprocity and giving somebody something and they feel they have to give it to you back. There's ways to do this with ideas. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Shermer. First of all, you're awesome. Second of all, Deepak Chopra and, by the way, Gene Houston, they don't realize it, but you and Sam Harris embarrassed them at the Nightline debate.
Thank you.
So here's my question. I believe this relates to brain activity very much. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. There have been reports, people have written books about people having experiences seeing both sides of the afterlife. There's a book called 23 Minutes in Hell by a guy who, as the title says, thinks he saw hell in graphic detail. There's reports of people seeing what they think is heaven. Book 90 Minutes in Heaven, the book that you referenced on one of your Facebook posts, Heaven is for Real. So what generates these beliefs? What are your thoughts on them as a scientist?
Right. Well, most of my talk did deal with what generates the beliefs. That is, the brain is capable of producing these sorts of incredible, elaborate illusions and hallucinations of a person. Persinger has people that describe being in his little sensory deprivation room with the helmet on, of going to hell and describing what it was like. Of course, the problem is how do we confirm this without actually having to go? Because I was thinking maybe I didn't want to go, but on the other hand, most of my good friends will be there. So since there's no way to test it, then we have to come around it from the side and just say, well, okay, what could produce those sorts of things? And of course, not everybody tells the same story about what they see in heaven or hell, except for the problem of cultural contamination. Like decades ago, aliens looked like all sorts of different colors and shapes and sizes, and now they all look pretty much the same. It's kind of reduced to the greens and the grays, who are apparently living in New Mexico, fighting it out underground or something. But before that, the Swedish aliens were like tall and blonde hair, and they all looked obviously geographically determined. What happened was that pop culture established what the aliens looked like when NBC did that film in 1980 about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction story, and the artist constructed the aliens for the TV show, and ever since then, that's what gets portrayed in pop culture, so people have that burned into their memories. So when they have the hallucination, that's what the aliens look like. If you lived 500 years ago, you wouldn't be seeing aliens at all. You'd be seeing demons, incubi, and succubi. So that's the process of producing it. It can't be tested, obviously, short of going there, finding aliens or something like that. So then we're left with the neuroscience explaining it. And it's pretty obvious now with the research we have that lots and lots of people, a significant percentage, probably maybe even 2-digit percentage figure, have some kind of anomalous psychological experience in their life, a deja vu. I mean, people report that, like maybe even 2/3. But actually, scientifically, really getting down to it, maybe 1/3 of all people have had some weird anomalous experience like that. So it's common.
So imagine you're at a global conference of gods, a kind of divine United Nations where gods from every corner of the world have gathered to discuss the state of the universe. The agenda is packed. Climate change, interstellar, diplomacy, and of course the eternal question of how to deal with humans. Unfortunately, as the meeting gets underway, chaos erupts, man. The gods can't agree on anything. Yahweh insists that he is the one true God, while Zeus rolls his eyes and mutters something about thunderbolts. Vision tries to mediate, but out of nowhere, Shiva starts dancing, and before you know it, the whole thing descends into a celestial shouting match. Chaos, basically. That introduction is basically my attempt at setting up today's video, which is about the argument from inconsistent revelations, a philosophical critique that asks why, if there is one true God, that there's so many conflicting claims about him or her or them. And basically, the argument from inconsistent revelations is a powerful challenge to the idea of religious truth. So here it goes. If God or gods wanted to reveal himself to humanity, why are there so many different, mutually exclusive religions? Why does Christianity teach that Jesus is the Son of God while Islam insists that he was merely a prophet? Why does Hinduism describe a pantheon of gods while Judaism and Islam are strictly monotheistic, man? And if God is all-powerful and all-loving, wouldn't he make his message clear and consistent rather than leaving us to squabble over conflicting revelations? At first glance, this might seem like a trivial objection to religion. After all, humans are fallible creatures prone to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. Maybe the inconsistencies are just the result of human error, like a game of celestial telephone where the original message gets messed up as it's passed down through history and the ages. But still, this explanation leaves its own set of problems, man. If God is omnipotent, why wouldn't he ensure that his message was transmitted accurately? Why allow so much confusion and conflict to arise from what should be a simple universal truth? One common response to this argument is the idea of different paths to the same truth. According to this view, all religions are ultimately pointing to the same divine reality, even if they express it in different ways. Hinduism, many gods, for example, might be seen as a unique aspect of the same reality, while Christianity's Trinity could be interpreted as another way of expressing that same idea. Basically, that in the end there is only one truth, and that truth can be found through different methods. In this view, the inconsistencies between religions are superficial, man, like different languages describing the same sunset. But while this approach is appealing in its inclusivity, it still doesn't hold up under close scrutiny. The differences between religions aren't just superficial, they are fundamental, man. Christianity teaches that salvation comes through faith in Jesus alone, while Islam insists that it comes through submission to Allah. Hinduism embraces the idea of reincarnation, while Christianity and Islam reject it outright. These aren't minor differences, the irreconcilable disagreements that we can't just gloss over with some talk of different paths leading to the same destination. Another response is to argue that one religion is true and all the others are false. This is the approach taken by many fundamentalist traditions who claim that the scriptures are the only true revelation of God. But this also raises another problem. How do we know which religion is the true one? Each religion claims to be the one true faith, but by its own set of scriptures, miracles, and personal experiences, without an objective way to evaluate these claims, we are left at a stalemate, man, with each side insisting that they're right and everyone else is wrong. I hope I'm making sense, man, because this brings us to the heart of the argument from inconsistent revelations, the problem of religious epistemology. How do we know which God is the one true God? How do we know what we know about God even? Because if we rely on faith, then we are left with no way to distinguish between true and false revelations, because after all, people from all different religions have 100% faith that their God is true. And if we rely on reason, then we are forced to confront the fact that the vast majority of religious claims are mutually exclusive. And if we rely on personal experiences, then we are faced with the reality that people from different religions have equally compelling personal experiences that led them to opposite conclusions, man. As you guys can see, the argument from inconsistent revelations isn't just a challenge to religious belief. It's also a reminder of the human tendency to project our own biases and desires onto the divine. Throughout history, gods have tended to look and act exactly like the people who worship them. The gods of ancient Greece were petty and capricious, reflecting the values of a society that prized cunning and strength. The God of the Old Testament is often portrayed as jealous and wrathful, reflecting the concerns of a nomadic tribe struggling to survive in a harsh environment. And the gods of modern religions often reflect the values of the cultures in which they arose, whether it's the emphasis on social justice and progressive Christianity, or the focus on ritual purity in conservative Islam. Now, this isn't to say that all religious beliefs are mere personal projections. Many people sincerely believe that their faith is based on divine revelation. But the argument from inconsistent revelations forces us to confront the possibility that our beliefs about God might say more about us than they do about him. It's a humbling thought, one that challenges us to approach religious questions with a healthy dose of skepticism and self-awareness, man. Yeah, so where does this leave us? If the argument from inconsistent revelations is correct, does that mean all religions are false? I personally believe so, but that's not necessarily true. It's possible that one religion is true. My possibility. And all the others are false, even if we have no way of knowing which one it is. But it's also possible that the inconsistencies between religions point to a deeper truth, that our understanding of the divine is inherently limited and shaped by our cultural context our cognitive biases, and the limitations of human language. So yeah, that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. That was definitely a good one, man. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I did enjoy it. I had fun. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section below, ladies and gentlemen. I love you all for the support so far. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment below so the algorithm can push the video to even more people, man. You know, yeah, so otherwise, stay safe. I'll see you again in the video that I upload, hopefully the day after tomorrow, man. Peace.